BYD, three letters that just a few years ago meant absolutely nothing to most people outside of China. Today they're sending shockwaves through boardrooms in Stuttgart, Detroit, and Tokyo. Mercedes watching its profits collapse. Volkswagen cutting 50,000 jobs. Porsche losing 92% of its bottom line in a single year. And behind every single one of those blows, the same name keeps appearing. But here's the question nobody is really asking. Is BYD actually the greatest automotive success story of the 21st century? Or is the reality behind BYD far more complicated than it first appears? Let's start from the beginning, because if you want to understand what's happening right now, you need to understand how absurd this whole story seemed just 20 years ago. In 1995, a 29-year-old engineer named Wang Chuanfu borrowed around $40,000 from his cousin, rented a small workshop in Shenzhen, and started making rechargeable batteries. That's it. No cars, no grand vision of taking on the world, just batteries. Within 7 years, he was supplying Motorola and Nokia. By 2003, BYD was the biggest battery manufacturer on the planet. Then he did something nobody understood. He took that money and bought a bankrupt, state-owned car factory in the middle of nowhere. His own investors tried to talk him out of it. The stock dropped by billions in 2 days. The Chinese business press called it a joke. And here's the part that makes it even more ridiculous. The man buying the car company didn't even have a driver's license. When Elon Musk was asked about BYD on live television, he laughed. Genuinely laughed. "Have you seen their cars?" he said. That was Musk in 2011. Today, BYD sells more electric vehicles than any other company on the planet, and Musk is not laughing anymore. So how do you go from a battery workshop to challenging some of the biggest automakers on Earth in under 2 decades? The answer comes down to 3 decisions that Wang Chuanfu made while everyone else was laughing at him. The first one is vertical integration, and it sounds boring until you understand what it actually means in practice. Tesla buys batteries from Panasonic. Volkswagen relies on hundreds of outside suppliers for chips, motors, electronics, even the glass in the windows. BYD decided to build everything themselves. The batteries, the semiconductors, the motors, the software, all of it, under one roof. When the global chip shortage shut down car production worldwide in 2021, BYD just switched on their own chip factories and kept delivering. Every crisis that hit their competitors made BYD stronger. That's not luck. That's a system. The second decision was to bet on plug-in hybrids when the rest of the world was obsessing over pure electric. In Silicon Valley, hybrids sounded like a compromise, but in rural China, where charging infrastructure barely existed, a car that runs on electricity for daily driving and switches to gasoline for longer trips was the only thing that made practical sense for hundreds of millions of people. BYD saw that. Nobody else did. And that gave them access to customers Tesla could never reach. The third decision was the Blade battery, released in 2020. Different chemistry, cheaper to produce. And crucially, it doesn't catch fire when you drive a nail through it. It was safer, cheaper, and lasted longer. And 4 years after releasing it, Tesla started buying Blade batteries from BYD for its own cars. The company Musk laughed at on television was now supplying the batteries inside a Tesla. That alone should tell you how much the game has shifted. Now, all of that sounds like a clean story of vision, engineering, and patience paying off. And you'll read that version in every business magazine. But that's not the full picture. Not even close. BYD also grew within a very different economic environment than most Western automakers. Between 2015 and 2020 alone, BYD received roughly $4.3 billion in direct government subsidies. In 2016, the year they hired a star designer away from Audi, the subsidies they collected from Beijing were higher than the company's entire net profit. Without the Chinese government writing checks that year, BYD wasn't making money. It was losing it. And the support came in every form you can imagine. Free land for factories, zero-interest loans from state banks, tax breaks, guaranteed public contracts for buses and taxis across hundreds of Chinese cities. Subsidies handed directly to buyers so that every BYD sold came pre-discounted by the state. At its peak, analysts estimated BYD was receiving somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 of public money for every single vehicle that rolled off the line. Now think about what that means for Volkswagen or Toyota. When they calculate the price of a car, they're competing against a company whose economics operate very differently. BYD could afford to prioritize scale and market share in ways many competitors simply couldn't. What emerged was a model that combined aggressive private sector execution with long-term state support on a scale rarely seen in the global auto industry. And here's the most revealing part. By the time Western governments woke up and started talking about tariffs and trade investigations, Beijing had already started quietly winding down the most aggressive subsidies. Not because anyone forced them to, because BYD had already reached enormous manufacturing scale before many competitors fully reacted. But now the cracks are starting to show, and this is the part the business press isn't covering nearly enough. In early 2025, a research firm in Hong Kong published a report that immediately drew attention across the industry. Their analysis suggested BYD's real debt isn't the 42 billion yuan the company officially reports. It's closer to 323 billion, almost 8 times higher. The gap is hidden inside something called supply chain financing. BYD pays its suppliers on average 275 days after delivery, 9 months. In an industry where 50 to 60 days is normal. Those unpaid invoices are technically debt. They just don't appear on the balance sheet. The scale of it is starting to remind some analysts of financing structures that became heavily scrutinized during the period leading up to China's real estate crisis. Then there are the sales numbers. In China, there's a well-known practice where dealerships register brand new cars under shell companies at the end of each month to hit targets, then immediately resell them on the second-hand market. On paper, those count as new car sales. Critics argue that some of these registrations may overstate real consumer demand. Images from 2024 showed rows of BYDs stored in large holding areas awaiting distribution or resale. When BYD says it sold 4.25 million vehicles last year, analysts naturally started asking how much of that reflects long-term customer demand versus inventory moving through the system. The quality issues are piling up too. In late 2024, BYD issued its biggest ever recall, nearly 97,000 vehicles over a defect that could cause fires. Then just months later, another recall, this time 115,000 more vehicles. On Chinese social media, complaints about GPS problems, electronics failures, and software glitches became increasingly common. In Brazil, the company is also facing investigations tied to labor conditions at a factory construction site, described by prosecutors as severe labor violations involving Chinese workers. And the financial results are starting to reflect the pressure. Net profit dropped 19% in 2025. Global sales in early 2026 fell 41% year-on-year. Even the Chinese government issued a public warning to domestic car makers that the price war they're engaged in isn't sustainable. When regulators start publicly telling the industry to slow down, it suggests growing concern about the pace of competition. None of this means BYD is about to fall apart tomorrow. The company is still massive, still selling more electric vehicles than anyone, still sitting at the center of one of the most ambitious industrial transformations in modern history. But the gap between BYD's extraordinary growth story and the challenges that come with scaling that fast is becoming harder to ignore. And whether BYD becomes the Toyota of the 21st century or eventually struggles under the pressure of its own expansion, one thing is absolutely clear. The rules of the global car industry have changed forever. So here's the question. Do you think BYD represents the future of the automotive industry? Or do you think the current EV boom in both China and the West is moving faster than the market can realistically sustain? I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more stories about the technologies reshaping our world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.